The Education of OverSoul7 by Jane Roberts. Read by Martin John. Chapter 25, in which Lydia meets Tweety, discusses the meaning of life with OverSoul7, and stakes out her future parents. Tenderly, actually with crafty tenderness, Joseph eyed Bianca while she lay next to him with her back turned. A while ago her body had just been a buxom, tasty one. He grinned. Somewhere along the line it had become her body, a natural, joyous expression of her Bianca-ness, so that sometimes he actually got embarrassed, when he touched her. She was asleep. He'd just wakened from one of his old man dreams, another vivid one in which a crowd of people were inside his courtyard painting. Now he ran his fingers down Bianca's smooth, naked back. How alive the flesh was, the veins like buried rivers. The body like a landscape, a fleshscape. He could try a painting from that angle. Bianca said. Better get back to your own room, he said. After all, the wedding's today. At least we won't have to sneak around any more. She wiggled with sleepy seductiveness, not at all worried. In fact, she wanted to laugh out loud, but she didn't dare. No more worries after today, she said. Can't you just imagine Jonathan's face if he caught us, even now? Come get up then. Hurry into your own room. She stood up slowly, stretching, arching her body in the particular way that always excited him. I suppose I should. Yes, I'll hurry. God, she was magnificent. His flesh warmed. His penis started a delicious ache. Yet to be caught, to antagonize the family at the last minute, after all their tortured sneaking about. They'd let you sleep late for the day of your wedding, wouldn't they? They wouldn't call you yet. She turned. Oh no, I better go. There's my hair to do, and I have to help Mama. There's extra butter to churn, though maybe I'll get out of that. Besides, if Jonathan caught us now... He groaned happily, grabbed her arm, and pulled her back down on the bed, while she looked tempted and willing, and confused and partially unwilling all at once. She closed her eyes, groaning herself. She loved him, and she loved the game. Oh, Joseph. Again, she wanted to laugh because the whole family knew what was going on. How did he possibly think they could hide all that? Her careful tiptoeing through the hallway from her room to his sly, barefoot rush to his door, ear glued to the wood, afraid someone was spying. What should we do? He'd say. I'll hide under the bed, she'd say. All that to add spice to it, to give him his excitement. After the wedding, sometime when it all seemed quite usual, she'd think of something else. An imaginary lover. No, he'd be likely to kill anyone he suspected. Her thoughts stopped. She let herself go in great emotional rhythms that were all bound up with their flesh, his and hers. He shouted, plummeting through her, though the delicious tunnel of her was mortal, ended finally with a bone. Still he felt as if he went traveling through and beyond flesh, his seed impatiently shooting into places he could not imagine, yet carrying him too. He felt this. No thoughts were involved, only a luxurious, joyous, tormenting acceptance and acquiescence. Here, now, you could push, shove, thrust, yell, laugh, shout. "Oh, oh," Bianca cried, dizzy with him. Her cry brought him back. He was finished, triumphant, yet scared, awed as he always was. You could get lost in that tunnel. You did get lost in it. Ah, who cared? And so the seed was planted, and an opening was made in the tunnel that leads to other realities. In one of these, OverSoul7 was talking to Lydia. "Do you feel better about things?" he asked. "You'll have to forgive me for staring," she said, "but I've never had any etiquette rules for talking to your own soul, and it's a bit disconcerting. And what am I supposed to call you? Besides, I didn't know that souls look like people." "I'm a people soul," 7 said. "What did you want me to look like?" "You're laughing at me, and that's not fair." "I'm your soul," 7 said reasonably, "and you have a very funny sense of humor. Actually, I just form myself into an image so you can relate to me, or so we can relate to each other. You'd find talking to someone you couldn't see much more disconcerting with your background. I could look like a ghost, but I prefer not to. That's too conventional." "And this place?" Lydia asked. "It's so beautiful, the trees and hillside. I can feel the grass under my feet. Is all this real?" "You need a location. You'd get upset if you thought you weren't somewhere," 7 said. "You always need a where to put yourself in. At least at your present stage of development." He coughed, remembering to cover his mouth because Lydia was still concerned about manners. "I seem to be an in-between stage myself, so I can sympathize," he said. "And this conversation?" Lydia stood up, musing, very aware of her body, the lithe form of herself moving, yet in what terms? "I need the words, too. Is that what you're going to tell me next?" she asked. He grinned. "And I suppose if I believed in heaven, then you'd experience it for a while," 7 said, "until you got bored or finally listened. It can get quite complicated." "Can? It is now," she said, still musing. "How strange. Oh God, Anna and Roger down there, still caught in all of that, and I can't tell them. But of course it's not down there, is it?" "No, it's right here," 7 said. "A different kind of focus." "I don't have to be born again, do I?" she asked. "Well, you have to do something," 7 answered. "And you need a framework right now, or else. Well, you have to learn to use your consciousness within a framework, or you can get very confused." "And God?" Lydia asked. "Who?" 7 said. "Are you a soul or aren't you?" Lydia demanded. "I thought you didn't believe in God," 7 answered. "But you're a soul, my soul from what you tell me and what I feel. You're supposed to believe in God, or who else will? What's the use of souls and all this if God is dead?" 7 didn't want to laugh and hurt Lydia's feelings. In fact, he didn't know how to handle the situation at all. "I'll ask Cypress," he said. "Who's that?" "Don't get me off the track," 7 said. "If you aren't really dead, how could God be dead? I didn't say that there wasn't one, and I have my own ideas of who it is, or what it is. See, when I use your terms, I get all mixed up." "Well, for heaven's sakes, use your own terms then," she said impatiently. 7 sighed. "And in many ways, I'm still an earthbound soul, or you wouldn't have already decided to be born again." "I've decided no such thing," Lydia retorted. "Yes, you have." "Well, not that I know of," she said. "I've always suspected it. This proves it. There's no free will." Seven closed his saintly-type eyes and mentally called for Cypress. She appeared looking feminine and lovely, but with the clearest, most brilliant, intelligent eyes that Seven personally had ever seen. He smiled gratefully, a touch for Lydia, who trusted the intellect so, he supposed. "Would you please explain free will to Lydia?" he asked. "She's worse than Joseph, argumentative, that is." "Like someone else I know," Cypress said, but so pleasantly and with such sympathy that Seven couldn't take offense, much as he wanted to. "Who are you?" Lydia asked, looking at her at once. "A friend?" Lydia and Cypress looked for all the world like two young woman friends, walking arm in arm, which was precisely what they did. Seven felt left out, or he would have, but a part of him understood what Cypress had in mind. "This reminds me of my college days when I was trying to learn so many things at once," Lydia said to Cypress, and Seven smiled. Why hadn't he thought of that? "Look over there," Cypress directed. They stood on the rim of a hill. Cypress pointed to the edge. Beneath, through clouds, a scene appeared. A lovely woman, no, wait, a child, first young, then old. "Oh God!" Lydia cried out loud. "Do I remember that? Or has it happened yet? That's the 17th century, isn't it? And that girl!" As Lydia spoke, the girl detached herself from the scene and walked up a shining ladder to the hill's brim. A bit too much, Seven thought, but Lydia seemed entranced. Then he took a better look. "It's my independent study. Tweety," Seven cried. "You're not that independent," Cypress said. Lydia sat down with surprise. "Why, that looks like the breath right out of me," she said, and Seven laughed. "Why, I remember now," Lydia said. "I remember making up my mind, quite on my own, to be born again. Only when did I decide?" "In the dream state," Tweety said, "and in that old people's home. But you forgot, and I was afraid that you might not remember," she added forlornly. "My real name is Daga. I adopted this form so you could see what you'll look like." "Daga? I told you it was just a matter of time," Seven said. "Of what?" Cypress asked. "Well, there's no need for me to have this image now," Daga said. "You won't be using it for a while." "In those terms," Seven said quickly, and Daga disappeared. Lydia scowled. "I still don't understand clearly." "You decided to be born again, as you remember now," Cypress said. "Tweety, or rather Daga, adapted the image for you so you could see how you'll look. Seven always calls Daga Tweety. It was a nickname of sorts. You liked that, too, and decided to use the name as well. Seven was giving you a good deal of help on his own. It was in the nature of a surprise for me, so I could see that he was acting independently," she added, looking nowhere in particular. "He wanted to keep one step ahead of me, in other words." Seven lowered his eyes. "But you're quite free to recall all the things that you've forgotten, Lydia," Cypress said. "I'll give you a clue. Remember the young artist you met the night you died, at the poetry reading?" "Of course! Now I remember. He'll be my father. I'm so verbal, but I'd like to deal with experience in terms of color and emotional richness for a change, yet still continue to be connected with the art somehow. And for once, I'd like emotional parents. I've been quite intellectual in many ways, which is good, and I've enjoyed it. But often I get so involved in ideas that I had trouble really feeling. And I do have strong abilities I haven't begun to develop along those lines. Joseph is emotional, I'll say that, 7 said. I met him in my dreams often before that, too. I just remembered. When we're alive, is that the term? Then we don't recall what we do when we're asleep. 7 beamed. You're doing very well. Why, I was drawn to him at once, Lydia said, and he and Bianca needed someone to give them intellectual balance, too. And, oh yes, I remember something else. I'll be the model for many of his paintings. She turned to Cyprus. But how can I be reborn in the 17th century if I died in the 20th? Funny. I was always attracted to the 17th century literature, too. That must be because I knew I'd be born there. 7 will explain, Cyprus said, with a smile. But you see, there is free will. We just knew what you'd decided, while you'd purposely forgotten. And Cyprus disappeared. Tweedy Lansdatter, Lydia said, musing. That will be my name. Tweedy, daughter of Bianca and Joseph. Joseph squirmed. I feel funny, he grumbled, like there's someone else in the room. You're just nervous after all the festivities, Bianca said. You're embarrassed to be alone with your virgin bride, she giggled. I ought to, he said, laughing, but he was exhausted. My God, there's a ghost or something in here, he thundered. Go to sleep, she cried. Lydia grinned, staring at the boots thrown on the floor, the pile of clothes beside the bed, the smell of sweat and love. How odd, she thought. She trailed about the room, smoking a hallucinatory cigarette, looking about 25. But in other terms, they were all of the same age. Ageless. God, how intertwined their lives would become. End chapter 25. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.